Hi everyone. Today what we're going to do is get into our review, and basically it's going to be two parts. The first part I'll be going through the main objectives of the semester, looking back at our three metaphors that we put forth at the beginning of the semester, and then we'll get into the final project. And so I'll talk about the guidelines, and I'll show you some past examples of projects. So overall, that's what we're going to do today. Keep this last kind of formal class short and sweet. So when looking at our course, if you go back to the beginning of the semester, I put out there, three different metaphors I wanted to use to approach theory. I said, we can think about theory in terms of a lens, uh, in terms of a tool, and in terms of a river. And so when you looked at theory as a lens, basically every piece that we read, whether it be the smaller pieces in our book, the larger pieces you read in terms of the Fine and the Veblen books, overall, each one provides us a lens and basically a new way to see an aspect of the social world. So if we're looking at social stratification, Veblen gives us a lens to see social stratification. If we're looking at how social change occurs, Durkheim and Marx both gave us different ways of seeing how social change unfolds in society. And then on a more micro level, we saw how self-change emerges, or how self-identification emerges. And basically, Adler's talked about this, D'Amelio as well. So, overall, each one presents you a new way of kind of seeing the world. That's why we need to kind of recognize the type of theory and kind of what they're trying to explain. And we can use those understandings to kind of see the world in a new way. And so the second metaphor we used is the tool. So the tool basically kind of gets into a little bit more of what's actually going on. So I like to think of the tool representing our book reports, recognizing those dynamics of structure and agency, the interplay of micro level and macro level forces, and kind of that driving force within the frameworks. So while the lens gives us a new way to see the world, the tool metaphor regarding theory gives us a new way to understand it. He kind of understands how things operate in addition to kind of seeing the world in a new way. So finally, the river metaphor is basically connecting the dots, recognizing how some theorists continue ideas of earlier theorists. Some theorists kind of reject earlier ideas to start their own thing. And then we're kind of recognizing that we can use the theory as a river metaphor to kind of see how the dots are connected, strong connections or maybe more indirect connections, but nevertheless, you can start to see everything kind of flow. And trying to visualize this, the theory as river, again, you can recognize here how, some are solid connections. So if you look at kind of the four classical theorists laid out in the book, including Simmel here, you can recognize how Marx and Engels and Weber have kind of a stronger reach compared to Durkheim, and Simmel's kind of out there on his own. We didn't talk about him this semester, but nevertheless, he's part of that classical four. And then kind of from the four, we can recognize the direct connections to the middle years. A couple of neo-Marxist pieces we read with Benjamin, Gramsci. We looked at Du Bois. We looked at Cooley and Mead, but again, they're kind of rejecting the earlier ideas. So that's why you don't see any connections to Cooley and Mead. They're kind of starting their own thing in response to the classical theorist. And then again, kind of going to the new contemporary theories, we can see D'Amelio, Sasson, Adler's, Fine, and all the direct and indirect connections we can make throughout the semester. So to me, it's kind of cool to look back at, the theorists that we went over and kind of connections between all the different ideas, and the kind of, again, in terms of a visualization, the metaphor of the river works well, recognizing kind of all the streams and where the streams originated, where the streams kind of broke off to make new streams. And so kind of keeping in the theme of visualization, basically that's what I'm asking you to do for this final project. So I know you've done a lot of reading, you've done a lot of writing throughout the semester, and what I want you to do is kind of take a little bit of a break from the writing and the reading to focus on creating a visual representation of two different theories throughout the semester. And so, overall, you can read the directions. You're going to choose one kind of pre-midterm, one post-midterm theory, and you can either create two separate visuals for the theories, or you can create one visual that incorporates both of your theories. And basically, what you're going to be doing is using a standard piece of paper, and on that standard piece of paper, create your visual. And you can use hand-drawn images. You can use pictures from magazines, newspapers, internet. You can create kind of collages, mixing, all these different options. So again, everyone's going to have a different project. You may even use the same theorist, but how you visualize them will be different from one student to another. So to me, as final projects, pretty cool just to see what you guys come up with and the creativity you kind of put in. I always say kind of the more effort you put in, the more you're going to get out of the project as well. And so basically you're going to have your visual, and then you're going to have a paper that accompanies it. And the paper is basically going to explain what's going on in the visual. You're going to talk about the theories you chose. You're going to talk about the visual representations that connect to your theory. And overall, when you take your visual and you take the paper together, those two things make the final project. And each of the two is worth 30 points for a total of 60 points. So overall, basically, the same amount of points you earned on the first two book reports, a little bit of easier project as long as you're putting in that effort and just as long as you do it. For the most part, students typically do well on this. So what I wanted to do now is just pull up some of the examples that I provided you a couple weeks back. So if you go to our D12 site, you'll find kind of in the bottom module, final project guidelines and examples. And I just have a few different projects from past semesters. So the purpose, of these visuals is to show you kind of the variety, the different ways of approaching it. So again, not one visual is going to look alike. So here's one that talked about kind of two different Marx pieces, earlier Marx pieces in terms of the Communist Manifesto, and the later Marx piece in terms of a neo-Marxist, Guy Debord. So that semester, we kind of did a neo-Marxist book, and they incorporate that in the visual. So again, maybe you can't recognize it from the get-go in terms of the different theories being examined, but once you explain it to the reader, and that's when everything will come together and make sense. Oh, I see the theories and how they're being used, after I kind of read your context and your description of the project. So another Marx piece here, they use commodity fetishism, and they also tie that to a different book that we read that kind of talked about the consumer-driven society today. So when Marx was writing, it was a more production-driven society, but we still fetishize these commodities. But today, the argument is we fetishize commodities even more because we live in a very consumer-driven society rather than the earlier production-driven capitalism. So again, there's 4 different images here kind of being used to tell a story and create a narrative about the 2 different theories under examination. So finally, you can look at these images here. And overall, I believe the first one kind of captures the Durkheim's normality of crime, normality of deviance, and what's considered normal at one time is considered abnormal at a different time, but how this deviance is needed to create social change, to promote social progress as a whole. And then the next 2 images here kind of tie into the Sasson piece, talked about kind of global cities today, and how these global cities kind of being reorganized by the wealthiest, the elites, and how the reorganization of these cities are tied into these elites trying to make money through a new means. Again, kind of a what we call postmodern capitalism rather than kind of the old industrial manufacturer center capitalism. So overall, again, the purpose of this is basically to show you different approaches that people have taken for the funnel projects. So don't feel like you have to do it in one way or the other. Be creative, and as long as you're kind of doing what you're asked to do, coming up with the visuals, explaining the visuals, you should be in good shape. So I'm going to leave that there for today. This is our last class before Thanksgiving break. So hopefully, if you guys get to watch this before break, enjoy it. And otherwise, when we come back and get things going again, we'll focus on these final projects. And again, do our best to make sure that you can get all the points that you can get. So we'll leave that there, and I'll see you soon.